Breaking news. A dramatic live clash between Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim, and U.S. Senator J.D. Vance has sent shockwaves through global politics. In a live-streamed showdown, watched by over 1.2 million people across the globe, the young African leader exposed shocking truths that left the American senator visibly shaken, embarrassed, and silent. What started as a diplomatic disagreement became a masterclass in leadership, fact-checking, and sheer intellectual firepower. This is not just politics. This was history in the making. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon in Washington, D.C., during what was supposed to be a standard panel on global resource management hosted by the Hudson Institute. J.D. Vance, the Republican senator from Ohio, had been invited to speak alongside several international guests, including President Ibrahim, joining live via satellite from Ouagadougou. From the beginning, the tension was electric. The topic? African nations' increasing refusal to be bullied by Western powers? J.D. Vance, who had never been to Africa, began with what he likely thought was a harmless joke. We can let nations rich in raw materials and poor in governance dictate how we do business. Ouch! The comment hit like a slap across the face of every African leader watching. Back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, years old, sharp-eyed. Dressed in traditional Faso, Don Fani paused, adjusted his earpiece, and leaned slightly toward the camera. Senator Vance, I appreciate your concern for governance, but perhaps you should concern yourself more with Ohio's crumbling water systems before lecturing the global South. Gasps filled the auditorium. The debate had gone nuclear, Senator said, pulling up charts from a screen behind him. Let me ask, what percentage of your state's budget goes to corporate subsidies? Because Burkina Faso spends 36% of our budget on healthcare and education. Meanwhile, your Congress debates whether poor kids should get free lunch. You're twisting things, J.D. Vance stammered. No, Senator. I'm stating facts. Here's another. Burkina Faso, a so-called third world country, has reduced child mortality by 28% in 2 years. And yet, American maternal deaths have risen, especially among African American women in Ohio. Comments flooded Twitter, just body-slammed Vance with statistics. Is this the new Malcolm X meets Nelson Mandela? How is this man not on Time's cover yet? Even major conservative outlets like Fox News couldn't ignore the firepower of Ibrahim's calm dismantling. J.D. Vance tried one final jab. Africa still relies on the West. You need us. Ibrahim didn't even blink. Need you? We are your raw material source, your resource base, your scapegoat for every economic failure. But we're no longer your pawn. The game has changed. The next morning, America woke up in shock. Headlines dominated every screen. CNN, Ibrahim schools, J.D. Vance, in live showdown. Facts versus fiction. BBC, Burkina Faso president dismantles U.S. senator with global. Audience watching New York Times, African leadership rebranded in 45 minutes. A moment of reckoning. In Ohio, Senator Vance's office scrambled. His communications director, Molly Freeman, was already on the phone with Fox, Newsmax, and MSNBC trying to do damage control. We need to change the narrative. Say he was aggressive, un-American, anti-democracy. But the internet was already ablaze. TikTok clip of saying GDP does not define dignity was viewed 21 million times in 12 hours. Young Americans, especially African Americans, began quoting him.
Twitter was trending. June divided Vance. Done.
Hashtag Africanlian late night host Trevor Noah posted. Some people bring cue cards to debates. Brought the entire African Union. 2 days later, President did something no one expected. He appeared on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper. When asked why he took the debate public, his response became legendary. When your voice is silenced in private, you must speak louder in public. Cooper leaned forward. Are you saying America tried to silence you? I'm saying the West has made a habit of pretending Africa can't read, can't lead, and can't speak. So this time we spoke. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance was invited on Hannity for rebuttal, but the senator looked stiff, distracted, rattled. Instead of defending himself with data, he attacked personally. Let's not pretend Burkina Faso is a model nation. They're poor, unstable, and run by a soldier, not a politician. That was a mistake, because the very next day, delivered a televised address in French and English, simulcast to 18 African countries. His message? I may wear the uniform of a soldier. Our budget may be smaller, but our ambition is larger, and our people stronger. He wasn't just answering J.D. Vance anymore. He was answering centuries of disrespect. In Washington, the situation was spiraling. Black members of Congress released a joint statement praising for his graceful handling of a situation steeped in ignorance and arrogance. Civil rights leaders praised him for speaking truth to power. Even Beyoncé reposted a clip of his speech to her 300 million Instagram followers with the caption, "Young African Unapologetic." At the UN General Assembly, Burkina Faso's delegation received a standing ovation. Secretary General Guterres said, "We are entering a new era where leadership is not defined by military power, but by moral clarity." Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's popularity rating in Ohio plummeted by 17 points. A group of students at Ohio State University organized a protest titled, "Debate Us Too, Senator." Inside the White House, chaos. President Trump, furious that J.D. Vance had become an international meme, called an emergency meeting. "He made us look like amateurs. That kid knows more about Ohio than J.D. himself. Get me my media team, we need a counter story now." But leaks emerged. CNN got hold of internal documents showing that J.D. Vance's prep team had underestimated, assuming he wouldn't speak fluent English or have a grasp on U.S. domestic policy. Bad assumption. In contrast, inner circled by Foreign Affairs Minister Aminata, had studied every major U.S. political issue, memorized statistics, and anticipated insults. "We expected a fight," Aminata later said in an interview. "We didn't expect them to be so unprepared." As the media circus continued, Burkina Faso's image began to shift. International investors took notice. A German solar firm announced a $200 million project in Ouagadougou. The African Union proposed a leadership exchange named after Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown, requested him to deliver virtual guest lectures. When asked why he agreed, replied, "Because it is not about ego, it is about the African youth watching who believe their voice doesn't matter. K does." At Yale, a student stood up after his lecture and said, "Mr. President, I never believed African leaders could talk like this on the world stage. Thank you for showing us we can." The room erupted in applause. A week later, J.D. Vance was invited to debate again, this time hosted by the BBC in London. He declined. Instead, Ibrahim gave a solo keynote. "Leadership is not about the size of your economy. It's about the size of your empathy, about whether you govern for Wall Street or for your street vendors. I chose my people." His words were carried live by 60 networks. By the time the plane carrying landed back in Burkina Faso, crowds had gathered at the airport to welcome him. Some waved flags, some held signs. "You spoke for us." Burkina Faso, standing tall. J.D. who? Back in Washington, J.D. Vance was unraveling. 3 major newspapers, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, and USA Today, in editorials condemning his ignorance and lack of preparation. One headline read, "How an African President Schooled an American Senator in Global Leadership." A bipartisan ethics committee began quietly reviewing his behavior. The Republican establishment distanced itself. Donors pulled out. His approval rating dropped to 19% statewide. Even conservative anchors were turning. Fox News' Laura Ingraham asked, "Is it time to stop underestimating these African leaders? Because clearly, they're coming prepared." J.D. Vance released a statement attempting to reclaim the narrative. He called him militant in a suit and accused him of anti-Western propaganda, but it was too late. The world had seen the truth, live, unfiltered, and devastatingly eloquent. In Africa, became more than just a leader. He became a symbol. Across the continent, youth movements began printing shirts that read, "Speak like facts greater than firepower. Unapologetically African." University debates in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa now opened with a clip of his BBC keynote. The African Union released a policy brief titled, "Diplomacy with Dignity, the Doctrine." Even Barack Obama, speaking at a leadership summit in Nairobi, referenced him. Sometimes it takes the fire of youth to remind the world that Africa is not just rising, it's arrived. In the months that followed, Google search volume for Burkina Faso hit an all-time high. Tourism surged by 240%. After, featured the country's beauty in an interview with CNN 3 News. African countries announced national leadership development programs inspired by his debating style and substance. But what mattered most wasn't the views or headlines. It was that for the first time in a long time, Africa wasn't being talked about. It was talking. Boldly, clearly, and on its own terms. And the world was listening. As the next election cycle neared, J.D. Vance's own party began looking for alternatives. A Republican challenger launched a campaign ad using footage of his most scathing line. "You criticize a country you couldn't even locate on a map?" The ad's tagline? "We need leaders who read." On election night, J.D. Vance lost his Senate seat in a landslide defeat. CNN's election desk called it with a chilling caption. "The debate that ended a career." A commentator added, "He was supposed to be the voice of Middle America. But he got drowned out by the voice of Africa." 6 months later, stood before the Pan-African Parliament in Addis Ababa. They said an African couldn't lead the global stage. He paused, allowing the cameras to zoom in on his face. "So I didn't just lead. I listened, I studied, and I came prepared." Applause. Thunderous. Africa doesn't need pity. It doesn't need saviors. It needs fairness. It needs the mic. And with a smile, he held up a symbolic golden microphone, gifted to him by the African diaspora in Chicago. And now, we're keeping it. Months later, in the quiet gardens of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, sat under the shade of a baobab tree with his daughter on his lap. "Papa," she asked, "why were people clapping for you on TV?" He smiled. "Because I told the truth. And sometimes?" She looked at him, eyes wide. "Will I tell truth too?" "Yes," he said. The camera pans out, the golden evening light sweeping across the palace grounds. The voiceover returns. He was called a dictator, a militant, and a boy. But he responded with facts, vision, and dignity. And in doing so, Ibrahim didn't just win an argument. He redefined what leadership looks like in the 21st century. Voice of Africa, dramatic stories, global leaders, a fiction that feels real.